think there's probably quite a nice opportunity there to maybe pull out on some different strengths that players kind of shine in different ways, as opposed to always looking at, well, they're the best player because they're the best player on the ball, but actually there's a bigger picture here to different ways that players can bring their strengths to the team.
Hi, welcome to Coaching Cards. My name is Taff, and today we're joined by Sam and Nim, and we'll be discussing how coaches use off-the-field coaching and learning effectively. I'll start us off, and I'm just going to pick a card and I'll throw the question to you guys. Okay, what does off-the-field coaching and learning mean to you?
I'll go. I think it's got to be context specific. So I think knowing and understanding your players, what they're capable of. I think it's about not overcomplicating some of the off-field activities that you might do with them. Again, depending if you're working in grassroots, professional game. I think for me, it's giving them an opportunity to learn, literally probably away from the field, away from the X's and the O's on the tactics board. And that probably needs a little bit of creativity from the coaches, especially around grassroots, where we know mums, dads that are in coaching have limited amount of time, so we don't want to overcomplicate it for them. But yeah, just giving them opportunities to learn away from the field in whatever way that might be.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And Nim, for you, in terms of...
I think for me, just building on what Sam said, I think there's a couple of things that sort of spring to mind for me in a grassroots lens would be maybe not having the luxury of video analysis as off the field. It may be simply just using a tactics board, simply just putting markers or cones down to help players understand aspects that you may not get in a professional environment. And also utilising that off the field format of learning, such as building things like your values that you may have, your philosophy, embedding some of those things, camaraderie and team chemistry, which you can also support with the players on the pitch, can happen massively, and it's got a direct correlation with what happens on the pitch. So things like team building events that you could do in a grassroots sense by taking the players somewhere to watch a game or do something completely away from football, but then has a knock-on effect directly to support what they're doing on the pitch.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that you guys have mentioned that also resonates with me. You mentioned in terms of even away from the game. So for me, I look at it as like coaching around the field and away from the field. So some of those things that you mentioned about in terms of around the field, tactics board, maybe some type of game where the players can manage and collaborate and engage in that way, and then really going away from it, maybe taking them to a game or giving them a task that they can have ownership in their individual time. So in terms of that, for me, it's coaching around the pitch, then away from the pitch, so going further afield, and how that looks like. Great point in terms of grassroots, academy game to the elite professional game. So those tasks might be more appropriately set based on the needs of the players and the resources they have. So in that way, yeah, lots of good points in terms of that.
So why is off-field coaching and learning important? Do you want to go like in your own context? So for you, Taff, what do you think is important around the off-field coaching and learning in the environment that you work in?
I think working within as a YCD in terms of with the academies and coaches within that environment, players are at different level in terms of the time and experience they've got, the access to resources they've got. So in that way, you can be a little bit more individualized and specific with regards to what they need, and maybe pairing people up off the field and taking that on and going more towards the professional game, giving them a sense of additional responsibility in terms of maybe somehow linking their ILP with some of the off the field stuff that they can go away and maybe use huddle or work with other MDT team members and the staff in order to support their development. So from my context, it will be a little bit more individualized, more detailed, going after more specific things that they can take charge of with regards to their development.
Cool. What about in the grassroots world now?
Yeah, I think for me, just touching on what Taff said around some of the IDP stuff and individualizing it, I think grassroots coaches have just got to be really clever in how they can utilize something as basic as a player profile that they may do in the off season to actually say, little Timmy might be a 3 out of 10 as an example in a scale on an aspect of the game, what can I do to help him off the field? It may be getting him to watch his favourite team on the weekend, you know, and go and watch Match of the Day and say, what did that player do in that position? We may not have access to some of the VO or footage in that sense, but we can be clever around actually have a look at this player, what they're doing. Could you maybe feedback that at the next training session to your teammates? So again, giving them a little bit of ownership in terms of a game plan or their own learning, and taking the burden away from you as a grassroots coach when you've got so many other things to think about as a volunteer in the game, and actually give the players an ownership of their own development as they see the game.
Yeah, I think in terms of grassroots, I suppose it's probably more of a challenge, isn't it, in terms of resources, time, which when you flip that on its head, you probably go, probably more important at grassroots, because typically grassroots probably coaches, players train once a week. We probably get 1 hour contact time with them, whereas obviously in academies, professional environments, they've got a lot of contact time. So I suppose how do you be creative with the players, like away from it, whether it be setting a little bit of homework on, I don't know, something you might have been working in during the week to then go away, and even if it's just practice, like 10 minutes, get mum or dad to video you, come back and show me, like, let's see what you've done, what you've learned. Can you find some stuff on YouTube that like might resonate with like the coaching skill or whatever we might have been working on? So I suppose the challenge for grassroots coaches is trying to be as creative as possible in challenging the players away from the grass, as much as we know that time's really limited for grassroots coaches as well. So without feeling that they've got that extra burden or extra stuff that they've got to do.
And just on that building, I think we can also get the parents involved in a grassroots perspective of, when I'm watching my son or daughter as a parent, I could be like, if I know what the coach might have been working on in the training session, so if it's, right, we want to try and stay on the ball and master it and dribble, I could be thinking, as I'm watching my son or daughter play, it could be a case of how many times did they take a successful dribble? I can then give that feedback to my son or daughter at the end of the game and say, did you know actually you had 3 successful dribbles? So how did you manage to do that? So we can actually get other people involved in that volunteer sense to actually help with the long-term development.
No, great point.
Okay, next question. How can you link off-field coaching to player development? So it probably just goes in line with the last question. So Sam, if you go first from a grassroots sense, how do you link off-field coaching to player development?
Like I say, I think it's just refining that hour of the week that you get, in terms of, like, say, setting challenges, tasks that link with that, but then can bring that into to match day. So probably expanding on the point that you've just made on utilising parents maybe on match day, that match day doesn't become just around match day and winning that game. Can we educate parents and players to see that as an extra training session, an extra opportunity, hour, whatever, to learn maybe? Can we ask maybe the parents to get involved in watching, observing, feeding back to the coach on their, it might not even be their child, it could be another child, but also possibly using the subs on the side. So instead of them doing whatever, like give them a focus to help the player who might come off for them and things like that. So I think it all links in terms of player development. The more we can give them, the more we can help them, the more we can challenge them and give them ownership of their own kind of player learning, player development, will help them progress as players.
Brilliant. And what about in your environment, Taff?
Yeah, no, in terms of that, like similar messages, utilising the space that's given off the field, whether that's an individual observation task for someone to watch their position from the outside of the field, and in that way seeing their teammates doing certain things that they're aspiring to do or they can't quite do. It's just giving them a different viewpoint to absorb that information, and then the coach working with the player to actually say, well, have a look at this from this angle. What's he doing before the ball and during and after? Because you don't get that kind of information when you're in it. So in that way, trying to get that detail across is a window of opportunity. But I also feel like from a perspective of learning, it's just another way of giving them similar messages that they might get on the pitch, but you might use different strategies on how you do that off the field. So while Sam was talking, I was thinking, what have I done in the past? So I remember like putting a Connect 4 game on the side and allowing the players to play connect four. And these were defenders. So in that way, they played it, someone won, and the questions were like, oh, why did so-and-so win? Oh, because you left the gap. And trying to transfer some of these abstract messages back onto the pitch. So when you two are playing together, try not to leave a gap, because they'll just thread the ball through. So don't let them connect through the middle. So how can you stay connected? So different things like that gets the players interacted in different ways. So for me, I see it as a great space to be creative, but also engaging, but bring different messages that could be transferred back onto the pitch.
Brilliant.
How can coaches use off-the-field coaching to engage players and impact their development away from the pitch?
I think for me, I'm probably going to think a little bit more elite now, with access to a little bit more technology. So if I think about some of the players that I work with like the VO, in terms of some of the video analysis and stuff, a crucial part for me in terms of that player ownership, player-led learning, some of the stuff that we ask the players to do in terms of maybe clip some of their own stuff, write down some of the timings, feedback what they're seeing, what they're feeling in those moments. I think sometimes we can be guilty as coaches of wanting to tell, wanting to show, wanting our opinion. So I think just making sure that players are allowed that freedom and responsibility to, like I say, to give you feedback on, in that moment they might have seen or felt something completely different to kind of what you've seen. I also think it tells you a lot about your players, who enjoys doing that, who wants to do that. I think it can show some real leadership qualities of certain people in the group that are prepared to stand up in front of their own teammates and go, like, I saw this, or I felt this, or I think we could do better here. So I think VO is a massive part of player development and self-learning. I think it's a great tool, by the way, and this is no plug at all, but in terms of how easy that is, I think in the past we needed analysts, we needed somebody to stand there with the camera, whereas now you can pop that up and get some really good footage. And I do know a lot of grassroots teams now that have invested and that are using them and getting some real quality. And I think it's also, just flipping back to the grassroots world, is, are you prepared to maybe give up a training night, one night of being on the grass, that if you are fortunate enough to have a facility to get the young players in a classroom and talk about some things and draw some things on, whether it be tactics boards or flip chart paper, and it might not even be around the X's and the O's and the tactics, but it might be just how they feel as a group, what they enjoy doing, what they don't enjoy doing. So again, I suppose it comes back to that, what I spoke about earlier, about being creative as a coach, as like, can you get them in a classroom and do something different and tap into the players maybe in a different way.
I think that thing that you mentioned in regards to, you'll find out a lot about your players. I think just looking at the game on a wider scope as well, when you set these tasks, what I found is that some players will be really good. Some players have outstanding support mechanisms around it. Some players actually lack maybe even access to a laptop or a game and so forth. And you've got so many people coming from so many different communities, they might not have the ultimate support that's expected in some areas. So in that way, as a coach, also finding out, you know what, so-and-so uncle plays football and he gets a lot of information. So-and-so has just started off, so I might have to do a little bit more or shape a task in a different way. I think in that way as well, being conscious that while we do set these tasks away from the game and around the game, that we also aware that there's constraints within their lives as well.
Do you think it gives the players an opportunity to maybe shine in different ways as well? So it might not be some of your technically best players, but actually they might shine in a different way, in terms of going like, but I'm really reflective, or I can share this, or I can speak in front of people. I think there's probably quite a nice opportunity there to maybe pull out on some different strengths that players kind of shine in different ways, as opposed to always looking at, well, they're the best player because they're the best player on the ball, but actually there's a bigger picture here to different ways that players can bring their strengths to the team.
Yeah, I looked at it on a couple of two sort of different angles, and the first thing that came to mind with the question was, when have I actually given my players some ownership when I've been a coach? And so I've worked in a university setting, and I remember sending the players the footage of the game and thinking, right, I'll give you a few questions, give me some feedback. And all they did was fast forward to where the goals were, because I hadn't really been clear with what I wanted them to specifically look at or the duration of the footage was too long. So I think sometimes you've got to be clever with the amount you give them as well to look at. So I went away with some learning and saying, if I'm going to send them a clip, it probably just needs to be a couple of minutes. Can you then come to the next training session and feed back to your teammates rather than me do it? And that made me think about grassroots coaches who are out there volunteering. If we set in off-field tasks for players, let them give the feedback at the next training session. It takes away the burden of me as the coach having to do absolutely everything. And it, like what Sam mentioned there about their own skills, they may be developing their own life skills as they go through the season or as many years that they play the game. But that developing of leadership, communication skills, that conflict management, all those different aspects, they can do between themselves, and I can just stand back. There may be opportunities for me to then just add a little bit more value on something that they may have missed.
Yep. I think that bit there, what Sam mentioned in regards to giving them ownership and so forth, and you've mentioned about clarity, and I'm just thinking back, there was some years back, I want players to be creative, and in that way, not to just give back the information or the objective that we're looking at, but deliver it in their own way. So the task was something around, I can't remember what it was, but bring something into the next session that connects to what you learn. And some players came with a medal, some players came with a picture, someone else came with something else that was out of the ordinary, and so on. So like, I brought this medal in because I remember when I was playing an under-12 game, this happened and I had to do this and this and this, and this connects to this game that we've just talked about. I had to be resilient, or I had to find a crafty way of getting through. And what that allowed it to do was, one, for the player to share a story of where they've experienced it. But what was amazing, the whole room was like, why has he got a medal? And why has he got, I don't know, a picture of this player with the Ukraine flag? So I remember, and almost like everyone was just hooked. But they were sharing it from their own perspective on what it meant. But again, like the clarity was key. Like, what did you get from that game that relates to the item that you brought in? And that ultimately also created a real good collaboration and connection and ownership within the group. So completely get, like, how do we give them ownership, but also give them creativity in order to share that message? And then again, be clear that it's actually leading to somewhere, so they're not going off and having a discussion that leads to somewhere else. So no, fantastic.
So do either of you have any examples you can share where you've used off-field coaching and learning successfully with your players?
I think going back to that Connect 4 example was a good one. Then again, that's just triggered another thought. So I remember some time back working with a player, and latter part of a game, it's toe-to-toe, and he's just made a big mistake. And absolutely devastated with regards to making that mistake. And it wasn't the right time to have a conversation with him. So after the game, set him a task to go and look at kintsugi, which is a Japanese form of art, and asked him to go and research and find out about it. And he came back 3-4 days later into a session, and he was absolutely like smiling to tell me what it was. So it's a form of art where broken pottery put back together is worth more, it's more valuable than actually the pot itself as a whole. And that was relating to mistakes. Like, mistakes will happen, but it's how you connect it back together. And that message landed with him, like, really, I don't know, in a broader sense that, it's always going to happen, or not always, but it's going to happen. But how do I stick it back together actually makes the whole. So in that way, that was a successful intervention, I would say. That also connected me and the player on a different level away from the game, and we can converse about other things.
Yeah, for me, that's a great example. I really like that in terms of the pottery and coming back together. That's fantastic. I think for me, one that springs to mind is we were reviewing some footage after a university fixture, and I said to, like, the leadership group, I said, between you, you're going to feed back to the rest of the players. You've got to put together a couple of slides, and then you're going to present that in in a classroom kind of setting. So for me, it was, again, just thinking about not just the task itself to help the team from a football perspective, but more just longer term as university students, preparing them for things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis with their education. and also life skills of presenting in front of their peers kind of thing. So they had to go away, they had to set up their own little WhatsApp group, decide on who was doing what, and then present it, put some slides together. And although the task had little value in terms of the football perspective, it was more around them just standing up and talking to their teammates about what they'd seen, being able to communicate effectively and just stand up and be brave enough to do something off the field as well as then bring it to life. And it was the fact that everybody felt the value of what they'd done. They'd gone out their way to prepare a task that's going to help the team ultimately. But I almost in the back of my mind just had actually, this is probably going to help them longer term with what they do. And, they then have had presentations that they've done through university. And a lot of them, like myself, when I went to university, I hadn't really done much in terms of standing up and presenting. So for me, I knew that was a challenge for me when I did it. So I know that part of what I'm doing there, a lot of them that might be on management or business type courses, it's going to definitely help them in the future. So I think there's clever ways we can do around setting the tasks and then feeding back, which is definitely going to help them and propel their learning off the pitch for the future.
Yeah. Just going back to the grassroots lens again, I think there's a huge positive in connecting early with parents. So I know we talk a lot around, as coaches, knowing and understanding the players and connecting with the players. I think at very young ages it's so important that we connect with parents like early on, and use that time early on in the season if you've just set up a new team or you're new into it, that you almost get the buy-in from the parents of what you're about as a coach, what are your values and beliefs, and then that the parents have got a more clear understanding around, like, whether it be equal playing time or like whatever you're going after or what you genuinely want to help the kids get better at, as a team, as an individual. Because I think then away from the grass, like, they have the most contact with the player out of anyone, so they can help reinforce some of those messages. But I think if we don't connect with the parents and we don't have an understanding around their world and the world that they live in with their child, it's kind of very hard and can become disconnected. So I think the importance of connecting with parents early on is really important in grassroots football, to help with some of the messages and just for them to be a support mechanism for you throughout your journey. Because it can be a lonely place as a coach on your own, whereas if you embrace the parents and take them on your journey with you, with the players, I certainly think that can help.
I think just with that, I don't think it's just in the grassroots, but in terms of the professional side of the game as well. Building those relationships with the parents allows you to have those passing car park corridor conversations that ultimately keeps back and forward on the spot reviewing and feedbacks. So in that way, I think it's critical to set out your stall in that way where you do connect with them, you do make that space. And it is a great support mechanism in terms of those tasks you can review in different ways. And I think, more value needs to be put on in terms of building a relationship through that.
What advice do you have to help coaches use off-field coaching and learning effectively when coaching in different areas of the game?
I think if we start with the 5-11s, for me, it's very much around keeping it simple, keeping it fun, making sure there's kind of an outcome to what you're asking them to do that they can then bring back into their environment. Engage parents as much as possible, especially at that age group, because that will really help the players. It'll help you. Keep things quite short. Don't give them like loads and loads of stuff to do. I know we sometimes talk about homework. I'm not sure that's probably the right phrase and the right word to use for youngsters. They probably get enough of the word homework at school. So just trying to be creative and keep it as fun and connecting back to their world, I suppose, in terms of what they are interested in outside of the training.
I think leading on from that, in terms of looking at up to 16s, it's still very, very similar. Keeping it engaging, keeping it so the tasks are curious, that they get into it, but also they see the transfers. I think you can go a little bit further with that YDP age ranges. They can have some individual responsibilities in terms of taking charge for themselves on what they need to do, or maybe in small groups while the game's going on or away from it. At this stage, they have an idea where their strengths are or their development areas are. So in that way, giving them a little bit more of a pointer, and also at the same time collecting back more feedback and review, because they should be able to diagnose what's worked, what hasn't worked, and actually work in collaboration like that.
Yeah, and I think probably more so from like an adult perspective. For me, it's probably just managing that physical preparation or physical conditioning or loading off the pitch that can obviously have a direct implication on the pitch. So for the younger age groups, you know, we can implement or adapt practices to have a physical return. But I think if we're just looking and thinking about when I've done some work in non-league as an example, we might set players a physical program to do off the pitch that they then have a direct correlation to what they do on the pitch. And as you go through the age groups, physical conditioning may be more present or more important as you go through different age groups. And then also the flip side of it is understanding the implications of it in terms of when they come back onto the pitch. So from an inclusive perspective with disability coaching, so impairment specific such as cerebral palsy, it's important to manage work-rest ratios off the pitch in terms of what you might set them tasks to do, which can then have an implication on what they do on the pitch.